Hello everyone, I'm your cat tutor, and this is chapter 2 of Basic SolidWorks 3D Modeling. In this chapter, we're going to go over Revolved Bosses and Swept Bosses. So on our previous video, we had this coffee mug that we designed using the very basic features of extruded bosses and extruded cuts. And we came up with this cylindrical coffee mug. We're going to go ahead and create a handle to this mug using a swept boss or sweeps. So in order to do that, for every time you want to create a swept boss, any kind of sweeps, whether it's a boss or a cut, you want to create a swept cut, you'll need two things for that. You'll need the path that that cut will follow and the profile of what that cut or boss will look like. In this case, I will need a handle. So for that, if I want my handle to be circular, I'll need a circle to create that boss cross section, and I'll need a path so that circular cross section will follow. So in this case, just imagine a circle right here, and that circle, if you look at it from the side, will go from here, if you follow my cursor, all the way down here in a sort of semicircular fashion. It could be a half circle, it could be whatever you want your handle to be. So we'll go ahead and do that. In order to do that, I want to create a sketch on this surface, and I can't really create a sketch on a circular or a cylindrical surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an additional plane using one of these planes as reference. So I either want to pick the front plane or the right plane. I'll pick the right plane because if I look at my mug from the front, I want to be able to see the handle on its side. But it doesn't matter. You can pick the front or the right plane. I'll pick the right plane. So I'll pick that one. I'll select it first. And then I'll click my reference geometry button on the top here towards the right. And it'll give me a bunch of options. And the first option is plane. So I'll select plane. So now, because we had pre-selected the right plane, it uses that as its original reference. And see, it's highlighting it in pink, but then it's creating a plane that's slightly offset. And this offset has been created here by default to be 0.1 inches away from that. It could be 0, but then that would defeat the purpose of creating a new plane. You could just use the right plane. We want it to be offset or related to some other feature, phase, point, vertex. It really depends what you want it. So what I'll do is I could potentially use this, and if I know my outer diameter, I can say, okay, well, I want it to be 2 inches. I know my mug is 4 inches in diameter, outer diameter. So if I select 2 inches, I can do just that. However, if I don't know exactly what this is, I don't have to select that. I can just select a second reference right here. Let me start from the beginning. So here we go. Here we have our selections. You can select up to 3 reference points. My first reference will be this, and automatically creates that yellow virtual plane. However, if I look at my main planes, I see that this is parallel to the front plane, and I want it to be parallel to my right plane. So as my second reference, see, it's already highlighted in blue here. As my second reference, I can select right plane, and what it did here, it selected it, so you can see it's selected in purple, and it created this blue plane, and that would be your final plane. If I hit OK, if I hit the check mark here, it would create that blue plane that you see here. But again, it hasn't done anything, it hasn't moved, it's still perpendicular, and that's because the perpendicular option has been selected. I want it to be parallel, not perpendicular. So I'll click on the parallel button, and it'll shift it over to right plane. And I'll hit OK. So now I have my plane that's parallel to my right plane. Okay, now that I have that plane, I can right click on the plane here on the design tree at the bottom, and I can select sketch. So now I look straight down to it. Remember, for you to do that, you select the control and the space bar keys on your keyboard, and it'll pop this up, and then you select your plane. So here we go. Now I'm going to create my profile. Remember that for a sweep you will need a profile and a path. So the profile will be a circle about that big. I always like to fully dimension all my sketches. You see it's blue, meaning it's underdefined. You see here at the bottom, it's underdefined. I want to fully define it. So this in diameter, I want it to be, yeah, maybe 5/8 of an inch. So 0.625. It's still blue because even though it has a diameter defined, I haven't defined it where on this plane it will sit. So I will do two things. One is I wanted to give it a distance from the middle, or you can pick the edge, but I like to pick my more defined points, such as the origin. So I'll pick the origin, and I'll pick my circle. It automatically selects the center of your circle. And I will say, let's see, 1.5 inches, what that looks like. That looks good. Again, it's still not where I want it. I want it centered, because if I create it here, as you can see, it's not even tangent to my mug, so it would look very strange. So the next thing I'll do, and this is the last thing I could do, so now I have a fixed distance from the origin, and I have a fixed diameter. So I only need one more constraint to fully define it. The origin, I'll hold down my control key on your keyboard, and then I'll select the center of that circle. Automatically you have options for constraining here, and I see that there's horizontal, vertical, and coincident. Horizontal will put this down here, horizontal to this. However, because this number has already defined it away from the center horizontally, it would give you an error. The other option is vertical, which is what I'm looking for. I want it to be right above it vertically. And the other one is coincident, meaning that this circle and this centered point would be exactly in the same space. So your circle would be here. Again, you would get an error because there's already a predefined distance from the center horizontally. So I'm going to select vertical. There you go. And now you see that the circle has turned black. You see down here fully defined, and that's what we have. So I'm done with my profile sketch. It looks like it disappeared, but it's still there. It's unselected. When you click on it, it's still there. Now if you don't want this plane to be showing here all the time, you can go to the plane, right click on it, and click on this little eye with the cross with the slash on it, and it goes away. Alternatively, you can go to the eye here at the top and click on this plane, and it'll turn off every single plane that you ever create on your part. So now I have my sketch. Now I need a path. Now the path cannot be on the same plane. It cannot be on the right plane. It has to be on another plane. So I'm going to select the front plane in this case. So once I select the front plane, I can create my curve that will start from the middle where my sketch is all the way down. So I will select front. You can right click on it and sketch. There we have it. I'll create a cross section just so I can view. So I'll select the front plane and then the cross section option down here, section view, just to see my mug and where it would be. So if you see it, that's what it would look like. Again, this cross section is only temporary, it's only for visual purposes. It's not an actual feature. Your part will not be cut in half. So I'm going to create a 3-point arc. So I'll go ahead and select the center of my circle. You see that it can select sketches on other planes. So that's what makes it really useful. So I selected the center of that first one, and then I'll select some other random point down here. Now I can give it whatever size I want, but you have to think about your design every time you're working on anything. You have to think about the user. In this case, will I be able to fit all my fingers, at least 2 or 3 fingers, to hold down this mug, depending on the size, the weight, So I'll just select a random number out here somewhere. It's still blue, that means it's still under define. I'll give it a random, just a number 1.5. Now we'll select the overall distance between the points. Let's go with 3. Alright, that looks better. As you can see, it's still under defined because even though it has those two selections, this can still spin around the very center. So what I'll do is what I did earlier, and I'll select 2 points. So I'll select this point and select this point down here, holding my control key, and I'll constrain them vertically. Now it's black, now it's fully defined. Now it can't go anywhere. I'll exit my sketch. I'll turn off my section view. And now if I pre-select my sketches, sketch 3 and sketch 4, I can see what it would look like. So now let's go to our swept boss. So swept boss is at the top here. It's the first button, all the smaller buttons. And the first it'll ask me for my profile. And you can see it's kind of pre-selected here. Where's my profile? Well, my profile is sketch 3. There you go. Automatically jumps to the next one to select the path, and the path is sketch 4. And so it immediately gives you, unless there's any errors, it will give you a preview, this phantom view, of what it will look like. And it seems like it looks okay, but when you get up close, you'd see that there are some gaps between both of these bodies. I'll click OK for now, just to see what it will look like. So it looks okay. Again, because this is on a tangent surface, you would see that these gaps would exist, and I'll show you later how to blend them. But first I want to get rid of this one right here. It's just jumping off. I'll do that by making this arc, the distance between the 2 points, smaller, and also the diameter of this cross section of the profile, it seems to be a little bit too large. So I'll go ahead and edit my sketches. So I check on the arrow for my sweep, my first sweep feature, and then I'll select sketch 4, right click, edit sketch, and I'll change this number by double clicking it. Let's say 2.875. Now this grew, let's see, so it gave me an error. Immediately it gives you an error. It does not rebuild because of the way it ends is not normal to the face. And you can change some of these things. Sometimes see this one aligned with end faces, so now the end face has been aligned, and that is the option that you will select so that it fills in the gaps. So now we have fixed our sweep. There's no more gaps. So if we do a top view, there's no more gaps. Now it goes right into the body of the mug, but I still don't like it how thick it looks, so I will edit my sketch here, sketch 3. So again, arrow, right click on your sketch, edit sketch. I'll make this 1/2 inch, double click, 0.5, exit sketch, and now let's see that's much smaller, and it still seems to be a pretty good size. It looks like one of those tin copper mugs. It's pretty thin, pretty shallow, and that is it for sweep cut, sweep bosses. Now I'm gonna go really quickly jump over to use Revolve Bosses. So I'm gonna create a brand new part. I'll keep this one open because it may come in handy a little bit. So there's nothing, brand new part. I'm gonna create a Revolt Boss. So I want to create a donut. This is where we already have a coffee mug. Let's go with a donut. So a donut is essentially a circle that goes around the loop. The cross section being a circle following a circular path. I'll pick the front plane, sketch, and I'll create a circle, and that circle will be the cross section of my donut. So the donut, the very center of a donut is empty. So that means that at the very center, or at least your path should be away from the very center. So I'm going to select a circle that is some distance away from the center. I don't really have the dimensions of donuts, but I will say that 2.5 inches from the center. It's kind of a large donut, but I know I'll dimension my diameter being, I guess, about 2 inches. Well, this is a really big donut. Let's change this to 3 so it looks more normal. Alright, we can change this later again. So you can see that even though this is defined in 2 degrees of freedom here, it's still blue because it still has this 3rd degree of freedom that it's allowed to travel. So I'm going to do what I did earlier, the same exercise. Select the origin, select the center of your sketch of your circle. Again, don't forget to hold down the control key while you do that selection, like with most Windows commands. And then you select the horizontal relationship, not vertical this time, but horizontal. Turns it to color black. It's now fully defined. Now we're going to exit. Now we see there's only one circle. There's nothing else. And that is enough. There's no path, but that is enough to create a revolved boss. However, we need an axis to revolve around. We don't have an axis right now, so we're going to create an axis. And where do we need an axis? Well, we need an axis wherever these two would intersect. That's where I want my axis. So we're going to create an axis by going to this reference geometry that we selected earlier for creating a new plane. And we're going to select axis. So there's several options here, and I can select 2 planes. That means that wherever those 2 planes intersect will give you will create the axis, will be used to create the axis. So now I want to select my plane, so I go down to my design tree here that's hiding. Here we go. I'll select the front plane, being one of my first planes, and the second plane will be not my top plane, but the right plane. And see, it immediately creates it where they both intersect, which is in yellow right here. That'll be their intersect point. Now you just select OK. Now you have your axis right there. So now you can just pre-select the sketch, click on it once, and then go to Revolve Boss. Now it needs the axis of revolution, and that's why we created that axis earlier. You can either select the axis here, or if this is hidden or you don't want to bother with it, you can actually just click on the axis itself, and it creates the preview for your donut. You can change this if you want some other a different type of Revolved Boss. So you can only be half of it. You can modify any degrees. You can change its direction to go in the opposite direction. But in my case, I want a full rotation, 360. Well, it doesn't matter where the direction is for me because it goes 360 degrees. Now I have my donut shape geometry. I'm going to save this as donut. Now that I have 2 of these, I'm going to put them together. You have 2 options. If you have a part open that you want your assembly to be part of, you're going to go to File and then click on Make Assembly from Part, meaning that it'll make an assembly from the part that's open at that moment. Alternatively, you can just go to File and say New, and then create assembly. And go OK. So it creates your design space. Automatically, it gives you this option of inserting components. Again, it doesn't even ask you if you want to insert components sometimes by default in 2016, because it makes no sense to have no parts in your assembly, at least most of the time. So it automatically gives you the option of start inserting components into start creating your assemblies. Automatically it populates the components that are currently open. So if I click on one, it'll allow me to place it wherever I want. However, I'm going to do this from the very beginning, assuming nothing is open. So if you create new assembly, this is what you'll see, just an empty space. Then you go to insert component. on the option on the top left, and it'll create this window that we saw earlier. If you have nothing open, if no other windows are open with your files, you can go to Browse and start looking for parts in your folders. But I already have mine open, so I want both of these because I just had breakfast and now I'm gonna have a coffee with a donut. So I select coffee, and because I created my parts using the top plane, using the appropriate planes, I don't have to worry about this being upside down or to the side. Sometimes you create it in a funky way, you select the wrong plane by mistake, or you simply select the plane that's most convenient at the time when you're designing. So before you place it, if this is not in the right orientation, SolidWorks gives you an option to rotate it about any axis that you have. So before placing it, it becomes really useful, so that later you don't have to be flipping things around. So when you go to the constraint portion of it, you won't have to worry about an extra operation. It simply lets you flip it about however you want. So let's do this. 90 degrees over, I spill my coffee. And when you click on the design space, it'll place it there. The very first component you place on your assembly is automatically fixed, and everything around it will be, everything that you start inserting after this first component will be added as a floating component. This one is fixed, so if I try to move it, it gives me that message that says the selected component is fixed, it cannot be moved. And then you say, well, you know, it's not where it's supposed to be, it's offset my top plane and I want it to be touching my top plane, or I want it to be centered between all three planes and it's not there, it's really way off. You can still modify it. So you can either right click on the part itself, or you can right click on the part here on the design tree. So that's what I'll do, right click, and you can click on select the option that says float. It'll float it again. It'll allow you to move it wherever you want. So now this is free to do its thing. So I want it to be right on the top plane, assuming the top plane is my table. So you have to select your constraints in a way that they're logical to you. So the top plane, so I'll select the top plane. Now I'll select the other surface that I wanted to contact. So now I'm creating mates. Creating mates is the next option here, and that's what you want when you're creating an assembly, because an assembly is by definition components being assembled together, that they have a relationship between one and the other. So in this case, I want my coffee mug to be on a top surface such as a table. So I want that top surface to be my top plane. So I select my top plane, and I can select the other surface, which would be this cylinder, and I can make it a mate out of those two. So I'll go to mate, and now here in this blue box you'll select all the surfaces, points, vertices that you want to mate together, and once you select them you'll have several options. So the first one will be my top plane. The order doesn't always matter, in this case it doesn't matter, but I'm going in this fashion. So top plane will be my first selection, and the next selection will be the actual surface. It automatically brings it to what it's most logical to SolidWorks, in this case being tangential, which is pretty much the only thing, one of the only things you can do between a cylindrical or a spherical surface and a flat surface. And that's exactly what I want. I want it to be tangential to my table. So I click OK. Now I have this. But then again, I know that this would actually fall down. It would not be floating like this. The handle would actually hit the table. So I'm also going to do that. I'm going to select the top plane again. And I'm going to select this surface. And it gives me an error that it would overdefine the assembly, thinking that it wants a parallel. But what I'll do is I'll shift it close to my top plane, and now I can do that again. So I go to mate, select the surface, and select the top plane, and see, now it moved it and shifted shifted it where it should be. I select OK. The first error that you get is because the planes that these was designed around, or this swept boss, was shifted a little bit, and so in SolidWorks mind it wanted to shift the entire thing downwards, which would violate the geometry of the component. However, if you sort of place it in the right position or close to where it should be, it now will understand, okay, well it's not meant to be on that parallel plane. And I think I'm making this a little bit confusing, so I'll just use an example, more visual example. So I'll put it back where it was. So what it tried to do, it was trying to mate this top plane with, let's see, with this front plane. It was trying to sort of mate these two tangential. Even though it was tangential, it was trying to essentially keep these two planes parallel. And again, that would violate the geometry of this mug. But the moment I change this down here, it no longer try to use that as its constraint of keeping those two planes. I'm not exactly sure why that logic is the way it is, but that is how it is. So so this is free to float around again. I'm going to constrain it. By the way, if you wanna go to the mate and do this entire thing, you can just select your surfaces. So I want that surface, hit the control key, and I want the top surface. And the moment you let go of your control key, this will pop up. This is the quick tangent. It's a quick mating menu. So I select tangent. It's funny because I believe that it picked the upper tangent. That's not what I want. I want to anti-align, so it'll select the other option. What does not give me. See, because I moved it too far, I'm going to delete it. Right click, delete, 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 delete. I'm going to select top plane, the surface, tangent, and it'll select the closest, the nearest tangential surface of this component to that parallel plane, to that top plane. So now there it is. It's sitting on my top surface, it's sitting on my table. But now I got to bring my donut into the assembly. Again, an assembly is multiple components assembled together. Again, it is not fully defined. You can see that it says underdefined, just like a sketch. It tells you if it's fully defined or underdefined. And I can use another plane to keep it fixed. I'll use the right plane and say perhaps the bottom of my mug. So again, for constraining, for mating, you'll select just one of your planes, hit the control key. I'll select that. You'll let go of the control key and you'll see that automatically it'll pop up this menu. I want it to be coincident, meaning that those two planes will be exactly on top of each other. There you go. Now I only need the other one last degree of freedom, a tangent surface. And at this point I'm only doing this so that this is fully fixed, and later, if the moment I start throwing in more components are not being shifted around because the initial part was never fully fixed. Now that this is fully defined, you can see down here, I cannot move it. So now I'll start throwing in more parts. So I'll insert component, and I'll select my donut that's already open on another window, and then here it is. You see that because I created it on the right plane and not upside down, if it was not designed the right way, if you're not thinking ahead of how your assembled components are going to come together, you may end up with a donut like this, and then you'll have to flip 90 degrees over. So in my case, because I had already designed it this way, it already comes in like this. So I'll drop it, and you see that it's floating. So again, I'll select the surface, I'll select the top plane together, tangent, there they are. Now I have a donut and no coffee, just a mug. The coffee is all over the table. Okay, this has been a quick video on creating sweep cuts, as well as revolved features, which come in very handy. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe, And thanks everyone for watching.